We went forward on the backs of the panzers, and that was the first wrong thing, because a man belongs on his own 2 feet or in a truck, not clinging to hot steel with the tracks turning under him and nothing to hold but the cleats welded to the engine deck. The trucks had been left somewhere behind in the night, or sent another way, or simply not enough of them had come up. Nobody told us which, and it was not the sort of thing they told us. The word that did come down was that we would ride Major Gradel's tanks into the attack, and so we rode them. I had 1 boot wedged against a toe shackle and 1 fist around the lifting eye, and Brandt was pressed against my back, and the whole world for the first hour was the grey rear of the tank ahead of us, and the brown cloud it threw up, and the smell of its exhaust which got into everything and stayed there for days. The dust came before the heat, and the heat came before the sun was properly up. By the time the light was full, it was already the kind of morning that promised to be cruel. The wind, hot and dry off the steppe, carrying the smell of bruised grass where the tracks tore it. And underneath that, the smell of the country itself, which was a smell of dryness, of a land baked so long it had forgotten what rain was. There was no shade anywhere, not a tree, not a building, not a fold in the ground that wasn't also a place a man could be killed. The steppe out there does not look like a place where things happen. It looks like the floor of a sea that has gone away. You ride across it for an hour and you have not got anywhere. The horizon is the same horizon, and only the dust behind you says you have moved at all. Vogt, who had charge of us, kept twisting around from his place by the turret to count us, to make sure none of his had been shaken loose. And once or twice he leaned down and said something I lost in the engine noise, and I only understood from his hand what he meant. Keep low, keep hold, don't be a fool, and stand up to see better. He was a calm man, Vogt, older than the rest of us, and he had a way of giving you a job to do with your hands when your head was beginning to run, which I came to understand was the most useful thing one man can do for another in that place. Brandt had decided sometime in the dark that the dust would kill more of us than the Russians would, and he kept saying it, or some version of it, into the back of my neck, the way a man repeats a thing not to be heard, but to keep himself company. I did not mind it. The sound of him was better than the engines. Zenhen was the youngest of us, hardly old enough to be there, and he had drawn the worst place of all, right at the back over the exhaust grills where the heat came up through his trousers, and he asked twice where it was we were going, as if any of us knew more than that it was east first and then south, toward a railway and a station whose name had been passed hand to hand, and that meant nothing to me. A Russian word for a Russian place, a dot on a map that some officer somewhere was. I told him the name back when he asked, only because he seemed to want it said again, and he nodded as if it helped, though it could not have. We were Kant's people that morning, the whole patched-together column of us, infantry off the regiment riding the armor, and Gradel's tanks carrying us, and a tail of other things strung out behind. And Kant was a name we trusted the way you trust the man whose orders reach you cleanly down the chain, which is to say not much and entirely, both at the same time. I never once saw him. I'm not sure I would have known him if I had. The generals were further off than that, far enough to be only rumor. There was a name, Fremere, the division, and above him another, Kempf, the corps. And what we knew of either was the weather of their moods coming down to us third or fourth hand, that someone high up was angry about how the attacks had been going in, that the panzers were being fed in too thin, in pieces, that there had been words. We did not know the words. We knew that we were riding tanks instead of trucks, and that the column had a thrown-together look to it, and a man on the back of a tank can read a great deal of an argument he has not heard from the simple fact of where he has been put and with what. But it was all guesswork. The truth of it lived in some headquarters tent with a map, and we lived on the engine deck, and the distance between those two places is the whole of what I can tell you about that war. The Stukas went over while we were still building speed. You heard them before the noise let you find them, that climbing organ whine that did something to the inside of your chest, whether they were yours or theirs. And then they tipped over far ahead where the Russian line was supposed to be, and the sound changed and got worse and came down with them. Senin watched with his mouth open like a child at a fair. Brandt said they were ours and to thank God for it, and then said it again, in case God had not heard the first time. The bombs walked across the ground ahead of us in a row of slow brown fountains, each one lifting and hanging and falling back. And the dust of them joined our dust, and for a long stretch we drove straight into a wall of the stuff, with the sun a smear behind it, and the tank in front of us no more than a darker place in the brown that we steered by. Vog told us, when he could be heard, that this was the good part. He did not have to say what the other parts would be. We all of us knew, in the way you know a thing without letting it come fully into the front of your mind, that the good part is always the part before. I want to set down honestly that for that first stretch it felt like something working. The tanks found a soft place in the Russian line, a seam adjoined between one lot of them and another, the kind of place an officer with a map prays for. And they went into it the way a wedge goes into wet wood, and we went in on the backs of them. There was firing now, the flat, dry crack of rifles and the stammer of a machine gun off somewhere to the left going on, but it was all happening to other people, or that is how it felt, the rounds going somewhere that was not exactly where we were. We came up on a position that the dive bombers or the lead tanks had already broken, and I looked down into it as we ground past and saw men in it who were not going to get up out of it, lying the way only the dead lie, and an anti-tank rifle thrown on its side and a helmet rocking. I had time riding past to think that the Russians were beaten here, that we had caught them wrong-footed, that we would be at the station by noon, and it would turn out to be one of the days a man survives without it costing him very much. A handful of them came out with their hands up, off to the right, grey with dust, and one of our tanks slowed, and somebody waved them to the rear, and they went stumbling back past the column the way we had come, and I remember being almost glad of the sight of them, because prisoners walking to the rear is the look of winning, and I wanted to be winning. That is the dust talking and the speed. We could not see far enough to know one true thing. A man on the back of a tank in that brown fog knows the cleats under his hand and the boots of the man beside him and the noise and nothing past it, and out of that little he builds himself a whole battle, and most of what he builds is wrong. I have learned since that this is the truth of it always, that the picture a man carries of a day's fighting is mostly the inside of his own skull, stitched together out of scraps. But that morning I had not learned it yet, and I let myself believe we were winning, and I let Senhen believe it too, and that is a thing I have had to make my peace with. Twice the tank under us reared and dropped, going over something, a trench, a gun pit, the steel pitching us against one another, and the second time it dropped, I looked down over Brandt's shoulder into the cut in the earth as we crossed it, and there was a man in the bottom of it looking up. A Russian, very close, his face turned up white in the shadow of his own hole, and for the length of a single breath we looked at one another, he in the ground and I on the steel, near enough that we might have spoken if either of us had had a language the other could use, and then we were over and across, and he was behind us and gone. I never knew what became of him, whether a man behind me shot him as the column went by, or whether he kept down in his hole and lived through it, or whether the tracks of the next tank found him. That face has stayed with me past 100 faces I ought to remember better and do not. He had not looked afraid. He had looked the way I suppose I looked myself, like a man to whom something was happening that was too large and too quick to take in, who had given up trying to take it in and was only watching it come. Senin had seen him too, from the back, and when we were past he caught my eye and there was a look on him I could not read, and I gave him a nod, the kind of nod that is meant to say it is all right, it is going our way. though it meant nothing and I knew nothing. A quarter of an hour later, the boy was gone off the back of the tank into the noise, and that nod is the last thing that passed between us. Then the tanks ran into the guns. I did not see the first one struck. I felt the column check, the way a train checks when the cars run up hard against one another all down the line, and the tank ahead of us slewed and threw its dust sideways, and through the gap that tore open in the brown, I saw the ground in front, and it was full of light. Low flat flashes, close down to the earth, a whole line of them, and between each flash and the sound that came off it, there was no time at all, no count, which a soldier learns to read at once, and in his stomach. It means they are near, far nearer than guns have any right to be, near enough that there is nothing between you and them but air. They had dug in along their own dirt. They had let the Stukas pass over them and let the lead tanks come on, and they had held their fire and waited, hull down where the dive bombers had not found them, and now they opened into us all together, at a range where a gunner would have to be drunk to miss. The tank to our right took a round through the flank and stopped as though it had driven into a wall that was not there a moment before, dead still, and then it came apart at the top, the hatches flung back and a fist of fire standing straight up out of it, and the men who had been riding the deck of it were gone, thrown clear or jumping, I could not tell which, and one of them was already burning before he struck the ground and did not get up from where he struck. The report of the gun that did it reached me a heartbeat behind the sight, flat and enormous, and then there were many guns and many sounds. The air gone solid with the passage of things, a noise like heavy cloth torn very fast and very close, again and again. And Vogt was no longer telling us to hold on. He had turned full around, and he was shouting at us to get off, get down, get off the tanks and into the dirt and away from them, because the tanks were now the most dangerous place in the whole world to be, each one of them, a thing the guns wanted dead, and us riding the outside of it like passengers on a coffin. I let go. I do not remember the fall, only that I was suddenly down in the grass, with the wind knocked clean out of me, and the great hot flank of a panzer grinding past a single stride away, near enough to put my hand on, the dust pluming off its tracks into my face. And I understood without a word from anyone that if it stopped there, if a round found it where it stood, it would burn down on top of me. So I crawled. I crawled the way a man crawls when standing up has become unthinkable, flat to the ground, pulling with my elbows and the toes of my boots, the chin strap of my helmet sawing into my throat, the rifle dragging, and the whole front of the world was the noise of those guns firing dead level and our tanks beginning to answer. And now, on top of it all, the shells from somewhere deep behind the Russian line starting to come down as well, finding us, walking through the open ground in long, careful... I do not know how long that lasted. Time stopped behaving the way it is supposed to. I have heard other men say the same, and I used to suppose they were dressing the thing up to sound grander, but it is the plain truth, and I will set it down. There were stretches in there I lived through a single second at a time, each one its own whole length, and I could not afterward have told you whether the worst of it was 10 minutes or an hour or half a day. I found a shell scrape, an old one, half fallen in, hardly a scrape at all, and I rolled into it, and there was a man in it already. And for a long time neither of us looked at the other. We only lay with our faces pressed into the dirt and waited for the firing to grow tired of our patch of ground and move along to somebody else's. When I did at last turn my head, it was Brandt, and he had blood across one side of his face that turned out later not to be his own, and he put his mouth close to my ear and said something about Senhen, that he had seen the boy go off the back of the tank when the first guns opened, go down and not come up, and that he had not seen him since. He did not say it the way a man gives a report. He said it the way you say a thing you are trying to set down somewhere outside yourself so you can stop carrying it. I had nothing to say back to him. I have thought since that I ought to have found something, anything, but there was nothing in me. And we lay in the dirt and the world came apart over us. The tanks were pulling back. I knew it more by ear than by eye. The note of the engines all changing together, the squeal and iron clatter of them reversing and slewing about. And I understood that Gradl had seen what we had driven into and was hauling what was left of his battalion back out of the killing ground before the guns, and now the Russian tanks made an end of it, because there were Russian tanks. I heard them before the dust thinned enough to show them, a deeper, heavier engine note coming on from the front, and then I saw them, the wide, low shapes of them coming across through the smoke of their own guns and our burning, the long barrels swinging, more of them than I wished to count, so I did not try to count. They came on steadily, not in a hurry, the way men come who know the ground is theirs, and where they met our panzers, the fighting closed up so tight and so confused that there was no front to it any longer. No line, only machines killing one another at ranges, where it came down to who fired first, and whose round bit true, and whose glanced off, and the noise of it was past anything I have words for. I was a foot soldier caught in the middle of that, and I will tell you that a man on his feet, among fighting tanks, is the smallest and most useless creature God ever made. You cannot help. You cannot hide. There is nowhere a tank cannot go. The ground itself bucks and jumps under you with the weight of what is happening, and the things that miss the tanks come looking for you. Brandt and I and the man whose scrape it had been kept flat and moved only when the moving looked the lesser of the two ways of dying, working back the way we had come, toward where the morning's attack had jumped off, toward our own side of all this. Twice we went down on our faces while a tank fought close enough that the heat of its firing washed over the backs of our necks. Once one of theirs and one of ours killed each other not 40 paces from where we lay, almost in the same instant, two great blows, and then both of them burning, and the small quiet that fell in that one patch of ground afterward with the men inside them was its own kind of terrible, worse in its way than the noise. From one of the two, from ours, a hatch came open as it burned, and a man got himself half out of it, and then did not get the rest of the way out. And I will not say more of that than this, except that Brandt, beside me, made a sound I had not heard him make before, nor heard him make again, and put his face down into the dirt, and that I understood it, for there is a particular horror in watching a thing happen to a man near enough that you could throw a stone to him and so far past any help you might give that the stone is the whole of what you have. We did not go to him. There was no going to him. We lay where we were, and the heat of the two burning tanks washed over us, and the firing went on around us as though the two of them had never been at all. And after a while the worst of the fire in the nearer one settled, and the hatch and what was in it stopped being a thing a man could let his eyes rest on. And we crawled on, because the living must crawl on. That is the whole grim law of it, that the living crawl on and leave the rest. And learn afterward, those of them who live, to carry what they were made to leave. It was somewhere in the middle of that, in the very worst of it, that the word came back about Gradl. It reached me the way every true thing reached me that day, broken and second-hand and on the move, from a man I did not know who was crawling the other way and who told it to whoever was near as he passed, the way you pass a thing along a chain of hands. The major was hit, a splinter. He was down but living, and the captain had it now. Bonwetch. I knew the name. We all of us knew Bonwetch, the way you come to know an officer who is spoken of as a decent one, and decent was not a word we spent freely or often, because there was not much call for it. The men said he carried his people's troubles as if they were his own, that he would not spend you cheap to buy himself a line in a report. There was a small and foolish comfort in hearing that it was him taking it on, even there, even with the guns still going and the tanks still burning. The comfort of thinking that whatever was coming next would at least be ordered by a man who counted us before he spent us. It changed nothing on the ground. The shells came down the same on the decent and the rest. But I have noticed since that men will take their comfort wherever the ground happens to offer it, and that day the ground offered very little, and so we took what there was. We got back. That is the plain and unheroic end of it. As the long afternoon wore itself down and the light went out flat and copper across the whole shimmering brown waste of it, the firing fell away. Not all at once, but in stages, the way a bad storm passes, with false endings and one more crash after you have decided it is over. And then at last there came a quiet that held, and we were back more or less where we had stood at the start of the morning. We had gained nothing I could see. We had ridden out across that ground in the early light, believing we were winning, and we had been thrown off it, and we had crawled back across it on our bellies in the heat, and the line we lay down on at dusk was the line we might have lain on without ever moving at all. The tanks that came back were fewer than the tanks that had gone out. They sat with their engines ticking as the iron cooled, and the crews climbed down slow and stiff and did not talk, and the grenadiers who had ridden out on the decks of them came drifting in out of the dusk by ones and twos on foot, the way men should have gone forward in the first place. Vogt found us. He had 4 of his left close to hand, and he went out into the failing light, looking for the rest of us, calling low, not shouting, because shouting felt wrong in that new quiet, like talking loud in a church. He gathered me and Brandt, and then 2 more out of the dark, and I went with him part of the way on his looking. We found a man from the next section sitting upright with his back against a wheel and his hands in his lap, unmarked, who would not answer and only stared, and Vogt crouched and spoke to him a while, gently, and then left him with someone and moved on. We did not find Senhen. A man swore he had seen the boy carried back wounded on a tank early, before the guns. Another was just as sure of the opposite. Nobody knew, and that not knowing was the very shape of the whole day, a day in which I could not have told you one certain thing about what had happened, beyond what had happened to my own body in the few square meters of dirt around it. Brandt had the boy's mess tin in his pack somehow. How it got there I never learned, and he sat in the dark, turning it over and over in his hands, and did not eat out of his own. When it was full dark, we were strung along a low rise with the tanks behind us, and the order was to hold where we were and wait, and so we held and waited. The heat went out of the day fast once the sun was down, the way it does out on that steppe, and men who had been gasping and pouring sweat in the afternoon were soon shivering, and we lay in our scrapes and pulled what we had around us and listened. Out across the dark where we had been, there were still small fires, the tanks burning down to embers, ours and theirs together now, no telling which from which, and every so often a flare went up from one side or the other and hung white and showed nothing and sank and died. No one could tell us what the morning would hold, whether we would be sent out again across that same ground, whether the Russians would come to us in the dark or the dawn, whether the station with the name nobody could keep hold of had been taken after all somewhere off on the flank by men we would never lay eyes on, and the whole of our day had been the price of a line on a map being moved a thumb's width. We had no picture of it. We had the rise and the dark and the cooling steel at our backs and the holes in our own number where men had been that morning. Sometime before my watch, the captain came down the line. I did not see his face, for it was full dark by then and no one was showing a light. But I knew it was Bonwetch by the way. The word of him ran on ahead along the rise, passed low from one scrape to the next. The captain is coming, and by the way, the men nearest him seemed to sit up a little out of their own exhaustion as he reached them. He stopped near us. He asked the section, through Vogt, who they had left and who they had lost, and he listened to the whole of the answer, the not knowing about Senhen and all, and he did not hurry Vogt through any of it. He said something about the wounded being brought in off the ground, that the parties were already out and would be out until first light, that no man who could be reached would be left lying where he had fallen. He said it quietly and as a plain fact, not as a comfort, And somehow that was the very thing that made it land in a man as a comfort, because it is the officers who promise you grand things in a loud voice whom you soon learn to set no store by. Then he moved on down the rise to the next of us, and the word went ahead of him into the dark, "The captain is coming." And we heard him a long while working his way along the whole line, stopping at every section until the sound of him was lost off to our left. Brandt said afterward that a battalion was only ever worth as much as whether its officers came down the line in the dark, and that most of them did not. He said it turning the boys' mess tin over and over in his hands. I have thought on it many times in the years since, and I believe he had the right of it, and I believe it is very nearly the only thing I carried out of that country that was worth the carrying. The wounded came in all through the night. You heard them before you ever saw the parties bringing them, the low sounds men make when they are past minding who hears, and twice a stretcher passed close to where I lay, and I smelled it before it reached me. That smell that lies under all the other smells of a battlefield, and that I will not try to set down for anyone who has not had it in his own nose. One man they carried by was calling a name over and over, not loudly, a woman's name I thought it was, and the bearer at his head was saying the same few words back to him each time, the way you gentle a frightened horse, and the two voices went off together into the dark, and I never heard how it ended. There is no end to most of it. The men go by you in the night, and you never learn what became of them. That is the part that is left out of the letters home, that a war is made up mostly of not knowing what happened to the people who were beside you an hour before. Fote put me on watch in the smallest hours, and I lay with my rifle across a fold of dirt and watched the dark to the east where the enemy was, and nothing came out of it, and the fires went out across the plain one by one until there were none. But I was not, in truth, watching the east. I was listening to Brandt behind me, who was not asleep either, turning the boy's mess tin over and over in his hands in the dark, slow, the small tin sound of it coming and going, the only sound on all that rise. He had not eaten out of his own. I thought once to tell him to put it away and sleep, and did not, because I understood that the turning of it was the one thing he had left to do for Senhen, who had gone off the back of the tank into the noise that morning with my nod for the last thing between us, and of whom no man could now say a true word, carried back wounded, or lying out in the dark where we had been, or simply gone, the way the whole day had been one long going of things a man could not follow nor get back. That was the 7th of August for me. Not the tanks, nor the guns, nor the Russian in his hole, only Brandt in the dark with the empty tin in his hands, keeping a watch of his own over a boy who was most likely past all watching, and that small tin sound going on under the stars, and no one in all that great cold country able to tell him to stop. If you want to experience this story in full, in a continuous audiobook format, without interruptions or ads, the complete version is available in the description. There's also an option that includes a written version of the story if you prefer to read along. And of course, it's a direct way to support our work, since the channel isn't monetized. If you're interested, you'll find everything in the link below.